where we're oh no, a robot. Um, where we're definitely in moving temporarily away from what McAlevey would call organizing into mobilizing, right? So we're in the GOTV stage, talking about how to the list of friendlies very ruthlessly, only the list of friendlies out to vote, right? And then we may worry about how to organize those folks after the fact. But this is one of those occasions where we have our backs against the wall. There's a clock, and we're going to try and beat the clock. So before I get too far, I wanted to go ahead and introduce my other presenter. So Jeremy, if you can give some bona fides.
Sure. Great to be here, y'all. My name is Jeremy Parkin, he, him pronouns. I'm with New York City Queens DSA. New to the NEC, but similar to Seneca, I've got a lot of big background in field work, specifically for GOTVs and just persuasion work too. Both Bernie campaigns, bunch of races in between. Worked with the Jeremy Corbyn folks in the UK during the 2017 snap election, where we demoed a lot of stuff. And I'm currently field director for Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez here in New York's 14th district. And it's great to be here. Can't wait to talk about GOTV with you all. So maybe let's start off with intros for the rest of everyone who's on the call tonight. So name, well, you can put in the chat. We have enough people. We can go around and have everyone come off mute and say it real quick. But say your name, pronouns, chapter, and what campaign you're preparing for GOTV. And why don't we start with Anish?
Hey all, this is Anish. I'm sorry I can't be on camera right now because I'm in my office. I'm here in Denver, and I'm working on the Yes on 305, that's the no eviction without representation campaign that offers free legal representation to every tenant in Denver if they get an eviction notice. We're on the ballot this November.
Hell yeah. And I guess I'll just go down the list. We'll go to Peter Clark next.
Yeah, from Winston-Salem, he, him. I worked on the Green New Deal, putting together point papers for the candidates, policy points. So everyone from Colorado, California, New York, all the way up, I wrote the point papers for them. Okay.
Love to see it. Alan Chin, you're up next. Alan, you are muted if you're trying to talk. We'll come back to you, Alan. I'll go to Aram next.
Hey folks, Aram. I'm also off camera because I'm driving home from work. He, him pronouns. I am with Seattle DSA, former co-chair of electoral, along with Jeremy's partner, Claire, actually, small world. Tell her I said hi. Not working on any particular campaigns now, but in general, interested in GOTV in general.
Thank you, Aram. Next up, we've got Dana Leahy.
Hi, everybody. My name is Dana, she, her. I'm from Pittsburgh DSA. Currently, we're working on getting out the vote for the general election. And next spring, there is probably going to be a ballot measure here in PA trying to take away abortion access. So we are busy trying to get ready to organize to fight that as well.
Amazing. So much good stuff happening. Let's go to Diego Morales next.
Hey everybody, Diego Morales here, pronouns he, him. In Chicago, I'm kind of walking outside, so sorry if it's noisy. I helped run field for a successful city council campaign here. So I've done this before, but I kind of wanted to brush up on things. It's been a minute. I'm currently working on a referendum campaign called Treatment Not Trauma, which will redirect funds from the police department to reopen mental health clinics and have a non-police crisis response through 911 for mental health emergency calls.
Amazing, thank you. Next up, Dylan P.
Hello, my name is Dylan. I'm in the Los Angeles DSA chapter. And I've helped out on a couple of the endorsed candidates campaigns this cycle, but I'm more curious. I'm involved with a campaign in like my small city in the LA area in Santa Monica. It's Jesse Zwick City Council campaign. I just want to brush up on GOTV because it's the campaign didn't even have a primary, so it was a very short turnaround.
Sure. And then my friend Jose Mariscal, let's go to you next. Jose, we can't hear you if you're talking. Sound's not coming through for you? Oh, damn. Okay, I guess we'll let you try calling back in or see if we can get it to work. Who do we get? Can we go back to Alan? Alan Chin, are you able to unmute now?
Yes, hi, this is Alan Chen, he, him. I'm in Ventura County, in California chapter. I'm not working on any particular get out the vote other than trying to, my chapter to get out and vote. But I came to this meeting hoping I could help out somewhere else within the country to help get out the vote. So there.
Love to see it. Seneca, I'll pass it back to you to get started with our slides for tonight.
Oh, wow.
Seneca, you are muted.
Hey, sorry about that. I already had started. Yeah, so I want to make sure that I bookmark and you can feel free to interrupt in the chat. I'll try to keep my eyes on the chat as we go. That our goal is to make sure that this training is actually useful to the populations here. And kind of the baseline assumption of a great deal of this training is putting in perspective for chapters that have not run a GOTV campaign before, right? So if we start going through this and, the folks on here, yes, I know what a universe is, this sort of thing, then we can go in and hopefully dial in on some of the more specific or novel things, the kind of stuff that you're going to see coming out of the Analyst Institute, et cetera. We can move around that. If on the other hand, a lot of folks really do need more focus on the basic grounding, we can stay on that, which is what the slides primarily built around, which means feedback will be greatly appreciated, right? The goal is not to hear me talk. The goal is to do something useful. So yeah, let's go ahead and talk a little bit about the overview of what we'll talk. The first is just kind of define the terms, right? What GOTV is, a ranking of basic effective steps, and then going through our preparation, right? What logistical pieces do we need to have in place in order to execute a GOTV program? And then finally, like what you're going to do during the week, or as is the case here, weeks, right? Because we have 2 weeks typically. Stuff happen. So let's go ahead and take the next slide. All right, so pretty simply, get out the vote, right? Is not primarily organizing, right? We are not using this as a persuasion stage. We're not building a new base, unfortunately, right, during the GOTV phase. What we are doing is to spend a whole bunch of resources on contacting everybody that the campaign has contacted before. And if we've done a good job, right, if we've been knocking on doors for 6 months or something like this before the race, that's going to be a lot of people, right? So this will be shorter conversations because we're going to be talking to folks who already agree with us, and then executing plans of social annoyance to get people to actually take the steps of voting, right? Because we'll know that of a set of support that is X big, and that if we get all those people to show up, that we'll be in the strongest possible position. This is also going to be a really stressful part of the campaign, right? Where you're going to have to be responding fairly quick. Oh, let me take a look. Okay. Sorry, let me minimize there. So generally speaking, GOTV operations have about a 1 to 5% swing on total turnout. Some tactics have more effect there than others. So we're going to talk primarily about ones rooted in these kind of one-on-one conversations. And even amongst one-on-one conversations, there are some pretty big differences. But as you know, a volunteer-run organization, the thing we're going to have the most of is the ability to have these one-on-one conversations with people. And social pressure is the most effective way of getting people to vote, right? People are generally considering this part of their civic identity, right? So they do this primarily because it is expected of them. And so reminding them of those expectations and of the stakes are primarily the ways that we get people to vote. You know, as socialists, we'd like it to be entirely around the issues. It won't always be the case. Sometimes it really is just noting that other people are doing it. And that people tend to move across social networks. So actually, before I move on to the next slide, I just want to talk a little bit about the piece there about the one-on-one conversations. We'll talk about this a little bit more later on, but who's having the conversation and how makes a lot of difference, right? So a completely non-personalized message that just reminds you that the election day is happening has a fairly small effect, right? It basically is just the equivalent of Google Calendar, right? Hey, this thing's coming up. The degree to which you place reminder of your kind of social connections with other folks and personalization increases it, right? So a generic text that says, hey, you can start voting for Beto this week to make a better Texas, or something like that. Very low efficacy. A text that says, your neighborhood is voting at record numbers in early voting right now. Will you join them? That's super effective for various reasons, you know, rooted in both group identity and shame. And a conversation from a volunteer, yet higher than that, right? Especially if it's using the same kind of messaging. And then finally, a conversation from friends or family, basically saying the same thing and then outlining the reasons to vote, much more effective at all of that. So as a volunteer organization, we have to make sure that we are using the most effective methods available to us, and those social connections that are part of our chapter, particularly when we have access to a large chapter, are the biggest resource that we have. This motivated voters can bring others with them. This is also something that we can directly influence. We'll come back to that later. So let's go to the next slide. All right. So generally speaking, we're going to start out GOTV 5 days to a week before early voting starts, right? So that means that we get a lead in. That's when we stop mostly talking to new voters. And instead, we're going to be moving towards our list. This is going to change if there's a ton of mail-in voting, right? Because we need a longer lead in. It also means, however, that a lot more people will have made plans to vote beforehand. And the distribution of early voting or voting in general tends to not be evenly spaced, right? So you're going to have kind of a wave that starts, it crests early in early voting, and this is generally when all the old people or absentee ballots tend to vote, and then it goes down, and then will tend to spike with young voters on day off, right? And so you can anticipate that you are going to need tons of resources leading up to that first spike, and then tons of resources focused on day off. This particularly matters if you're trying to use vote tripling, right? Because that tactic is going to require you knowing when lots of people are physically going to the polls already. Let's go ahead and go to the next slide. Okay, so the preparations, they're stressful. So the main thing that you need is a list of your supporters. That's the people who've been ones and twos. If you don't have enough ones and twos for your win number, right, which win number is generally going to be calculated by 50% plus 1 of the average turnout of the last 3 elections of this type. That can get a little screwy because like things like the Trump effect and stuff happen, right? So sometimes you have these really big spikes, your win numbers can be off. You want to try and have the resources to contact those people 3 times. Now, if your win number is not big enough, you need proxies. And there are some other things you can do to juice, but basically what you're going to do is, and you need a nerd to do this, take a look through Van, and you're going to look at the demographic characteristics of your 1s and 2s, and then look through your universe, the people who most look like those people. There are other ways that you can sometimes generate proxies as well. So for example, if there has been an issue campaign in the year prior around a ballot initiative or something like this, you can sometimes use 1s and 2s from a previous campaign as proxy 1s and 2s. We did this in Austin around 2 of our ballot initiative elections by taking people who had voted for Jose Garza the year before on the presumption that they were generally going to have high criminal justice salience. So these are the things that are a little bit harder to do, right? It takes somebody who knows data fairly well to do, to build the proxies. The other list of supporters that you cannot possibly neglect is your own chapter members, right? You must have a plan to comprehensively contact all of your chapter members and have them reach out to friends and family, at least 3. You'll hear this phrase vote tripling used. 1s and 2s are people who are strong supporters of you. So if you're using Van, if a 1 is strongly supports you, and then a 2 is lean support you. So these are the people that you have canvassed, texted, phone banked, who you got the vibe or told you are strongly supporting you. Presumably, your chapter members all strongly support you, and their friends and family are likely to listen to them, right? So a crucial part of your 1s and 2s is contacting everybody who is in your chapter and them to talk to their friends and family about voting for your candidates. So that phrase we use is vote tripling. This is not in the slide, but it's super important. A well-executed vote tripling operation can produce up to a 2% increase in turnout, right? So that's sometimes comparable to the rest of your GOTV efforts combined. So that means that when you contact these people, you want to ask them, when they say, yes, I'm going to vote, and we'll talk about the plans to vote in a second, can you remind 3 people to go vote during early voting? And then you want to ask them, what are those people's names? Just their first names. And when it comes to their time to vote, so they're going to say, yeah, I'll remind Peter, Paul, and Mary. And you're going to call them back and say, hey, it's the last day of early voting. Can you remind Peter, Paul, and Mary to vote? And you're going to do that to your members too. This has a huge effect on voter turnout because it's a relational ask. It meets people who may not be in your universe, and the social pressure aspect is high. Anything that reminds people that other people are voting is more likely to make them vote. So let's go ahead and go to the next slide. All right. So as we said earlier, there tends to be some really big discrepancies in your IDs, right? So some will get way more IDs than they win in votes. This usually means they have a poor GOTV operations. Other times you can really underestimate turnout. So like in May in Austin for our ballot election, if you took that standard formula I gave you, so that's last 3 elections, the average thereof, 50 plus 1, you would have gotten a win number for our May election, which was a ballot initiative to recriminalize homelessness, a win number of 12,501. Okay. And so if you build a campaign plan like we did at first around trying to reach that number, right? That's a find some people who vote a lot and then persuade them type campaign. The actual number of people who voted in that May 1st election was 150,000. So you can see how that does not put you in a strong position of winning, right? Because a significant portion of the people who voted, you never talked to. And you need a different field plan, right? One that is not primarily concentrated around finding the people who are most likely to vote and then persuading them like super, super, super hard. And there are other things you can do. Mail pieces tend to be very important in winning municipal elections because they're a quick way to reach, old people that vote a lot. But you may not have the funds for that, right? A mail pass in Austin is probably going to cost you about $12,000 per pass. So if you can't do that, you have to use actual volunteer methods, right? So those are going to be what we talked about before, which are relational organizing, vote tripling, direct canvassing, and then postcards too, if you want to put that in there. So let's go to the next slide. Okay, so we want all the supporters to get a phone, a phone touch, a door knock touch, and then an email touch if we can get it. And we want each one of those supporters to be asked directly to do vote tripling. That part is super not optional. People don't do it, but when you do it, you get about a 2% boost in turnout, which can be make or break in a municipal election. We want to make sure that any door hangers or literature that we leave has all the relevant information about when the voting period begins, right? So do not just reuse what you had started with at the beginning of the campaign, right? Your persuasion mailer, persuasion piece. When you get a hold of your voters, you want them to have a plan to vote. Has everybody heard this phrase before? Plan to vote? Just put in the chat like a yes, no. Okay. Cool. So for anybody who doesn't know, plan to vote means specifically, when are you going to vote? Where are you going to vote? Are you bringing anybody else with you? Right. And you want them to rehearse this in their mind, right? Because it increases the social pressure. They told somebody else they're going to do it. They made the mental plan, and it's much more likely. So if you combine that with the social pressure, which is where you remind them that other people in their network are going to vote, that's more effective. If the person who reminds them is somebody they know, that means the social pressure is already baked in, and then it's super effective, right? So relational outreach, which is literally just having your supporters reach out to their friends and family, is something like 9 times more effective than cold outreach. Most campaigns don't do it because it takes volunteer coordination and you have to start earlier. But if you do it, it's vastly effective. So don't skip it because it's not expensive to do. It's just time consuming. Go to the next slide. I'm trying to remember. Are we switching over at what slide number are we on?
I think I'm going to take over at this section here.
All right, you don't have to see my face anymore.
Face is so nice, this Seneca. Thank you. One more thing, I did bring a prop along with me. So Seneca mentioned plans to vote. These are some of the pledge cards that we're using, and you'll see, similar to what Seneca was referring to, on the back of it we have the 3 ways to vote. So you can vote absentee, early, or E-Day in person. You pledge to vote for AOC. Do you want to volunteer? Are you going to bring 3 people with you, right? So the idea with these, and I highly recommend something like this to be used during GOTV or right before it. The idea with these is that the voter will fill out their information right here. They'll mark down how they want to vote, that they support AOC. And then this bottom part right here, see if I can do this, tears away. You can also say ooh la la now. And then this part here we'll give to the voter. We'll check it off right there what their plan to vote was. We're going to take this part back to the campaign office. We're going to enter this into Van. So just a cute, fun prop for you all as we continue on here. So I'm going to start by talking a bit about quality versus quantity. And this is in reference to the different types of ways you can talk to someone during GOTV. Seneca has alluded to this multiple times in his section, but something that I say a lot too in trainings is that people don't vote based on logic, they vote based on emotion. What are different ways to trigger emotional responses that will result in a vote? Well, the best one is personal contact, right? If I go to your door, we have a good conversation, great, we're making a plan to vote, you remember me, I remember you, we're laughing, we're smiling, we're high-fiving, whatever. We're speaking in language, right? Don't forget to do your conversaciones en español si puede. That's great, right? Best possible contact is in-person contact. However, as we all know, you are time limited with that. We don't have infinite time, infinite people to knock on those doors. So the next least effective is phones and texts, as you can all probably imagine. A phone call, not as personal as a door knock, still great. Same thing with a text. We can do a lot of experimentation with different kinds of text scripts. I know we all hate the big ass long ones, sorry for cursing. The big old long ones from Nancy Pelosi, we hate those. Let's make our text short, punchy, engaging. We're trying to get responses back on them and stuff. That's the good stuff right there. Mass email can be great, right? If you've built an email list, I know these people, these are supporters, maybe they're donors as well. I could send my GOTV plan to vote stuff to them. We are about to do this with a, similar to the card that I showed you, a pledge to vote page. So if we email out to folks, they can then fill out this pledge to vote page. We get that info, we follow up with a phone call or a text or a door knock. And then the least effective but widest reach is media and mailers, right? You could do a $2,000 Facebook ad buy, you can reach thousands of people. Mailers can be pretty expensive, but you can reach a lot of people. You can get some really splashy stuff. See if I have a mailer here. This is not quite a mailer, but you know, we got big flashy literature, candidate's face on it. We got some stuff on the back about what she stands for, what you're voting for her, all that kind of good stuff. So personal outreach always the most effective. But if you're looking at who your voters that you're trying to reach, prioritize the in-person contact for the folks that it's going to have the highest impact on. So that varies by campaign, but very typically these are going to be folks who, like, maybe they voted once 2 elections ago, right? They're registered Democrat, they voted in the 2020 general election, or they voted in, let's say, 2018 general election, they didn't vote in 2020. We really want this person to turn out, like they're under 40, right? This is a perfect kind of person that you should be going to in person. For your folks who maybe voted in 2 out of the last 3 elections, a phone call can sometimes be pretty good for those folks. They're used to voting, you know, maybe they just need a little reminder to plan to vote, and that's gonna be what's gonna get them out the door. But the in-person stuff, make sure you target your most valuable voters. Typically the folks that are high support, low turnout is who you want for in-person contact. We're running a little behind, so I'll try and make sure we get through all this in time with time for questions. So field or visibility. So this is referring to, it's election day, right? We've done plans to vote, we've activated plans to vote, we've had great personal stories we share with voters, we've gotten emotional connections out there, people are ready, they're psyched, they're stoked, great. It's election day. Do we want to prioritize field, right? Knocking people's doors on E-Day on November 8th, or are we going to prioritize visibility, where we're going to be out at poll sites, making sure people see us out here with candidate signs, with a tent, snacks, water, whatever, right? What's going to be the most effective? Well, depends on the race, right? So let's say you're in a low turnout race, you know, city council, off-year election. I'll use New York City as an example, right? Next year we have city council elections. In my district here, which is thankfully Tiffany Caban's district, we see maybe, you know, like 5,000 votes. You know, it's pretty low turnout in a district of like a couple 100,000 people. So in that kind of situation with low turnout, I might say, great, I'm going to spend my election day knocking on more doors to make sure that I get those last few voters, those last stragglers out. You will talk to less people this way, but it's going to be more targeted and meaningful. Maybe in my race is actually maybe fairly higher turnout, but it's a general election and I'm working for the state Senate candidate. People don't really know who the state Senate candidate is. They're here to vote for Joe Biden or whoever, right? Okay, well, visibility might be great then because a lot of people are going to be coming to the poll site. I can grab folks as they're arriving, let them know about my candidate. You maybe can even do a little bit of persuasion there, but still you're going to be wanting to focus in on the emotional connection, who this person is, sharing a personal story about why you support this voter or why you support this candidate with the voter so that they can take that with them into the polling place. You can catch a lot of people this way. We actually saw this during the Kristen Gonzalez election earlier this summer. We caught a lot of folks that were coming in that we could just tell about her and they liked her and they went in and voted for her. It's fantastic. So let's talk next about field messaging. Actually, one quick last note on this. If you have the capacity, you should do both, field and visibility. You should have volunteers out at the busiest poll sites in your district, talking to voters, and you should have people on the doors milking those last few GOTV targets. Field messaging. So like Seneca mentioned, we've got all of our ID'd voters first, right? These are the first people that we want to talk to. We want to ask if we can count on their vote and either go to persuasion script or vote details. So as an example, the way that I'm scripting it right now for our GOTV is, hey, I'm here with the AOC campaign. I see that you're a supporter. That's great. What do you like about AOC? What keeps you coming back to our campaign? Blah, 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 Green New Deal, Medicare for all. Great, that's amazing. I support her because XYZ. I'm calling you today because the election is coming up and I want to make a plan to vote with you. There's 3 ways to vote in New York this year. You can vote absentee, by mail. You can go early in person. You can go on election day. How likely are you to vote in this election? Maybe yes, no, great. Okay, great, you're likely to vote. What is the way that you plan to vote this year? Great, good to hear. And then if you're voting early, I'll then ask them what day and what time they're going to be voting. Like Seneca mentioned, you want to do something that I sometimes call, you make them open their mental schedule book. People say, oh, I'm busy. Oh, I got to drop the kids off for soccer practice. Oh, I got to go to my town hall meeting. Oh, I got to go to work, whatever. It's really easy to forget about voting and all of that. It's on a Tuesday, right? It's a work day, whatever. Make sure that when you're having these conversations with people during GOTV, you are specifically asking for a day, a time, a commitment, a method of voting that hopefully you will then record on something like a pledge to vote card or a minivan if you're doing door knocking. However you're going to be capturing that information, you're going to capture that and get it back to your campaign so we can follow up with that via phone or text as well. And then finally, like Seneca mentioned, vote tripling. Ask them to bring friends and family members with them. This has been really successful for us. In our campaign this year, we got redistricted, obviously, so along with the rest of the country. So we are talking to voters in new parts of the district. A lot of people don't even know who AOC is in places like Hunts Point and Soundview in the Southeast Bronx. So when we're talking to people and they're stoked and they're excited about her, we're often able to get someone else who lives in the same apartment at the door too, that will get brought along with that person when they go to vote. So let's touch on visibility next. So visibility, what does this look like? You've probably seen this before, you've probably done this before. You get a bunch of really nice people out there with signs. You stand 100 feet away from the polling site. If there's a line, right, in states that have lines, sometimes there are, sometimes there's not. You can talk to people in the line as long as they're 100 feet away from the polling place. You're going to be really enthusiastic. You're going to have really branded materials, bright and colorful, really easily visible out there, so that people can know who your candidate is and who you're standing for. Highlight things confidently. Like I was saying before, visibility can also be a chance to do last minute persuasion. So if people are like on the way to the polling place, you can say, hey, I can walk and chat with you for a minute. I prefer to stop people. When I do visibility at poll sites, I set up like a tent and a table. I have literature, a tablecloth, a sign, a poster, right? And I'll stop people as they're coming, talk to them real quick, give them a piece of literature, make sure that they know that they're voting for my candidate this year. This can be really useful as well, not just at poll sites, but places like train stations. Obviously, that's big for us in New York, but lots of other places. You can do bus stops, you can do busy intersections, shopping areas, entrances to malls, things like that are all great places if there's going to be high foot traffic to direct people to a nearby election or a nearby polling place. For example, here in Astoria, the Museum of the Moving Image is an early vote site. So we'll typically be at the subway stops around that site when early voting starts to direct people down the road to where the polling place is and they can vote today. Get everyone's attention. GOTV is also the best time to do these big rallies, get these photos out with lots of people, happy, smiling, working hard, supporting this candidate, right? Get that excitement. That sense of urgency is so important during GOTV, not just for your voters, but for your volunteers. Because as we all know, this is the most important part of the campaign. We need the most volunteers out as possible. This is a little counterintuitive sometimes. I saw a study on this, I think it was in the Analyst Institute, I don't remember, but they were specifically wanting to see, okay, if I tell someone that turnout's going to be really low, does that make them want to vote more, or do they want to vote more when I say that turnout's going to be really high? What do you guys think? Put it in the chat. High or low turnout? What's going to get someone to want to vote more? Y'all have heard this one before. That's correct. According to this study, when they told people that turnout was going to be really high, people were more likely to vote. That's the element of social pressure Seneca was talking about too, where other people think that other people are going to do something, they're more likely to do it. We're humans, we're pack animals, right? We got that deep in our evolutionary brain stems, you know? If more people are doing something, I'm more likely to do it. We hype people up by saying it's gonna be a big turnout, we're gonna get a lot of people out. Obviously don't lie to people, right? Everyone knows it's gonna be low turnout, cool. But then there's other ways to do that, you know? It's like, okay, well, we're all voting. Our movement is voting. DSA is voting. Our supporters, we're all getting out there. We need you to join us too. Get that media attention too with these big rallies and things like that. In terms of your spend your big money at the end when people are paying attention the most. So those few last days leading up to the election, spend that money. Buy those ads, buy those mailers, send them out, make sure they hit those doors on time, talk to your mailer vendor, make sure they're not fucking up, make sure that they're gonna get it there on time, you know, and spend that money. So you can't spend it afterward. Well, I mean, you can do a lot of stuff with your money after the campaign, but it doesn't matter if you lose, spend it to win and finish strong. So no matter what happens after election day, bring your people back together, because we're not just organizing to win an election with DSA, we're organizing to build a movement of working class people across this country. So one of the greatest things about electoral campaigns is that they bring a lot of new people out. We are still seeing people come out to volunteer for AOC for the first time. They've never done a political campaign before. It's a beautiful thing, you know, and we want to make sure that they stick around for the long term. So what are some of the ways we can do that? Oops. Well, make sure you do some debriefs with people afterwards. Get them to join DSA, plan post-election meetings, do debriefs, do autopsies of the campaign, talk about the numbers, clue your volunteers into the behind the scenes stuff that can be very inspiring for people, especially folks who are younger getting involved for the first time, maybe too. Really good stuff. We have a link here for some post-election resources too, that you all can see in these slides, which I think will be sent around afterwards as well. So I will stop there. And now we'll open it up for questions. I know we've covered a lot, so please feel free to call back to anything in the slides if you want us to go back to anything. But we'll open up the floor now for questions for myself, Seneca, Stu, anybody. We'll start this here. Go for it, Diego.
Yeah, so in Chicago, we have early voting. And sometimes in the past, we have done GOTV where we'll even set it up, or we'll have volunteers that are willing to even like drive people to the polls and stuff like this. And I imagine we may want to do that again. I just wanted to know if anybody else has experience with that and has any sort of tips or pointers for getting that early vote out.
One thing I'll say right away, Diego, is that rides to polls tend to work best, in my experience, when you have a concentration of people that can all go from the same place. So senior centers is a good one, community centers, schools, colleges, that kind of thing. I mean, universities especially, a lot of kids don't have cars, right? So if you're able to organize rides to polls from a university campus, that's a really great way to do that. Because I've also sometimes had it where like I'll organize rides to polls and like 2 people show up and I'm like, okay, well, like I just got 4 volunteers with their cars for 2 voters, right? Like what was this? So high impact, high concentrations of people is one thing I'd say on that.
Yeah, on rides to polls, you know, this will vary some. You know, you're in Chicago, so that you're going to have some advantages that like Austin will not have in terms of the overall density of the city, right? More people living nearby each other, it's easier to cluster folks to go to places. But even in a Sunbelt city like Austin or Tuscaloosa or something like this, there's a lot of segregation, right? So a lot of the working class voters that you would really like to vote are clustered together because of the evil genocidal history of our country. And so there are typically social institutions that would be strongly positioned to help put together a ride to the poll program, right? So typically those are going to be churches, particularly in Black or immigrant communities. And they're just going to conveniently be right next to where all of your voters are. And so you can set up a van or something there and people will go there and go to the polls. Souls to the polls, typically called.
Love souls to the polls.
The other thing is, and this is something I'll hammer again on the vote tripling piece, is like you don't just need to catch people on the way in. you can have a lot of impact by just identifying people who are already supporters, who already voted for you as they're leaving. They're going to be much more open because there aren't like 9 other people trying to get their attention usually. Yeah, and you have a big sign, right? So you have an AOC or Carlos sign or whatever, right? And people come up and they're like, yay. As soon as they flash you some piece of affirmation, you just are on them like white on rice, and asking them to think of 3 people who are not here at the polls today, right? Because that's one of your big impacts of vote tripling. It's a lot easier to do during early voting than it is day of, because they have more chances to try to come out. So catching people while they come out is really easy compared to catching them while they go in.
Like Seneca said, we are now social pressuring you to ask more questions about GOTV. I require at least 2 more questions tonight.
Hello, I have a question. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead, Dylan.
Okay. Yeah. So I'm curious about how to use social pressure or the timing of reaching out to volunteers to get them to show up for GOTV. Like, do you have any suggestions on like consistency of outreach or things we can say in the messaging? Like maybe, you know, examples that I'm thinking of like, oh, this is a high turnout election, like you mentioned in the presentation, or like, should we give more specific, like we need to turn out this many people, we need to reach this many voters, you know, what would you suggest in the messaging so that when we email or text follow up a volunteer who signed up, like they actually show up, you know?
There's a couple things, and Seneca, I know you'll have some good insight on this too. One thing that I've seen done before is a social pressure mailer. And what they'll do here is that you can do this with van access or any kind of, if you're in California, PDI access, which LA, I hate PDI, but it's useful. What you can do is you can pull people's vote records, right? And so what some folks have done is they've done these social pressure mailers, which basically refer to their vote record. They'll say, hey, Dylan, you only voted in 2 out of the last 3 elections. We have a big election coming up, and I see that your neighbors are voting at higher rates than you. So we want to make sure that you turn out this election. I don't know how I necessarily like feel about that all the time, but I've seen it be effective before. It's something to maybe consider in your race. But some other good social pressure language is anything that refers to like group activity. We are voting, our movement is voting. We're going to have high turnout, like I said. Things around sometimes the opposition can be helpful. You can say things like we're seeing high Republican turnout, we're seeing high turnout for our opponents, right? And we don't want to get caught off guard. We've got to make sure that our movement shows up and that we show out hard for people. Seneca, what about you?
Yeah, so social pressure stuff is so effective at boosting turnout that it still works when it's creepy and off-putting, unfortunately. So like, for example, during the Prop B election, the homeless recriminalization, our opposition this backfired a little bit, but I'll explain why in a second. They had a list of all the people who'd signed their evil petition up front. And so what they would do is text you, your neighbor, blah, is voting for Prop B this week. Will you? And that's super effective. The only reason it backfired a little bit was because they had very deceptive ballot or deceptive petition gathering techniques. So a lot of the people that they said were supporting Prop B were not supporting Prop B. They still won, which is evil and terrible, but not by as much as other anti-homeless measures have. So basically reminding people, it's like a weaker version of relational organizing, right? So being reminded by your friends and family that they're doing a thing is super effective. And so these kind of texts and messages can work as a proxy. They're not as effective as having friends and family. So one thing I would emphasize is start your relational organizing really early on, and use it for everything, not just GOTV, right? Use it for event turnout for canvases and stuff like this. If you're using Reach or Empower, which are the 2 relational organizing apps I'd usually recommend for chapters, then you should have a record, right, of kind of who knows who, and you can take Reach and Empower. So Reach, you can get, I believe it's 2 or 3 campaigns for a chapter, right? Like say 2 issue campaigns, an electoral campaign for about $150 a month. And Empower is free for C4 organizations. The Reach has a prettier graphic interface. Empower is very good too. So yeah, I would look at those two. Yeah, use relational organizing whenever possible. So like if you canvass somebody and you identify them as a volunteer, you shouldn't just mark them as a volunteer in Van. The standard protocol should be that you then open up your relational organizing app. So let's say Reach or Empower, and then you put that person as a contact. And so one of the things you should be asking of your volunteers and of your field organizers, if you get paid once, is that every volunteer ID that they made, they should reach out to that person personally, right? Instead of having a volunteer mobilizer do it, right? To be like, I'm Seneca. We talked about how I was homeless last week, and I'm asking you to go to this next canvas. Much harder to ignore me.
And I'll jump in really briefly and just say FOMO works really well if you're trying to mobilize fellow chapter members. And I mean, we have an incredible resource with DSA chapter lists, with membership lists, and especially consistency during campaigns in terms of canvassing. If you've been running canvases or a chapter field operation for 3 or 4 months, you've got a list of people who have already showed up once, which is incredibly powerful, and people who are very, very likely to do so again. So I'll drop a FOMO post from Metro DC in the chat just to show everybody what we're working with. And it works pretty well because I'll see people on the street, or I'll talk to people during the week, or I'll see people at a canvas the next weekend, and they'll say, oh yeah, I saw the post and I'm really sad I missed happy hour. Like, it was a really nice day and everyone looked like they were dressed in their fall best. And it looked very crisp and lovely, and I wanted to get out and walk with people. So
one more thing I'll say on that is with the language part, what's up, pup? Guilt, sometimes it can feel like you're guilting people. Do it anyways. It might feel like weird guilt, like I'm like guilt tripping someone. It's not going to come across that way to people. Most people legitimately like appreciate that you're trying to turn them out to vote. Most people. I would draw the line at shaming people. Don't shame people, but guilt can be a very effective tactic in the context of social pressure. I think there was someone else who had a question too.
Oh yeah, I was gonna ask, for a place like Washington that does all voting by mail, how would you recommend navigating GOTV with the timeline?
Great question. Thank you, Jose. So with an all vote by mail state like Oregon, Washington, and I mean, California is 80% vote by mail. We're almost there in California. You have a longer runway. So I would start GOTV as soon as ballots drop. And one great thing about that in Oregon and Washington is that if you knock on someone's door and they haven't voted yet, they can vote right there. You can get that vote immediately. You can see them bubble it out, put it in the box, right? Great, So there's even more urgency. And sometimes it sucks because you got to do your hardcore GOTV for like a month instead of a week, but that's what it is, right? Every single person whose door you're going to knock on is a potential vote right then and there. You don't have to wait till election day to see if they voted based on your conversation, or if you have to reach out to them again. If they vote right there, great. One thing you're always going to want to do when you're in a heavy vote by mail state is make sure that you get in touch with your state party or whoever your van administrator is or your PDI administrator is, and check in about your matchbacks. Matchbacks is when the voter file will reflect who has returned their ballot already when it's been received by the State Board of Elections or city or county or whatever you're working in. So that will be the most effective thing for you, so that you can start striking people off your GOTV list who've already voted, and make sure that you're prioritizing the folks who still have their ballots in hand. Yeah, Stu, I've had that a ton when I've campaigned in Washington too. Yeah. Oh yeah, I forgot it on the counter. Oh, I think my coffee cup's on it. Yeah, that's your ballot. Let's fill that out. More questions. We got 4 minutes. Let's go. Anish, go for it.
So for a campaign that did not have mailers as part of their initial GOTV plans, because of financial constraints, what would you say is like the bare minimum or the most ideal sort of demographic we can target with respect to that without burning through our coffers?
I definitely have some thoughts on this. Seneca, do you want to start on this one?
So typically, in campaigns I've worked on, we'll use mailers for lower density areas, so like ex-urban, that are more difficult to walk. And we will also use it for olds because they check their mail. I would also say if budget is a concern and you have high amounts of volunteer visibility, that I think it's still shaking out, but the evidence for postcards, handwritten postcards, is okay. But it might be something you can try because it's cheaper. There's some experiments going on now, so maybe by 2024 we know some more about the effective ways to do that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'd say a similar thing. When you're looking at like low budgets and where to prioritize, obviously like what's free, like knocking doors is free for the most part. I mean, van access, literature, whatever, yes, but it is cheap. So if you only have a limited number of people to go out there, make sure you're prioritizing, like Seneca said, high density. You can typically do that if you take your whole GOTV universe, all the people you're targeting, break it down by precinct or election district, and see what the highest number is, and then send people to there and hit it hard. Not necessarily because they're going to be the people that are like always the most likely to turn out. They probably are because you've done a good GOTV universe, right? But because you're going to get the most bang for your buck per walk list. If I'm knocking 50 doors in an area that's really dense, I can knock maybe 2 turfs on my shift instead of just one and be driving between doors if I'm out in the sticks. I also think that, well, I mean, Facebook ads are sort of waning in effectiveness as they like tighten down, and as Zuckerberg gets very guilty about all the bad things he's done because he's a very naughty boy. But you can get pretty good bang for your buck on social media ads these days. I mean, with like $1,000 spend, you can reach a lot of people, especially if you're in like a state assembly, city council, county level race or something. They can be pretty effective in terms of reaching a lot of folks really quick. And if it's paired with something like strong urgency, social pressure language, maybe a pledge to vote page or a plan to vote type of language, that can be pretty effective too. And yeah, good for your money.
You know, I'll also piggyback on Seneca's point about proxies earlier. We had a couple of neighborhoods this past primary cycle where we knew we were going to do really well in those neighborhoods. We just knew that was our base of support, and there were 2 or 3 neighborhoods. They were densely packed of accessible sort of row houses and street level kind of apartment, duplex apartment type deals. And we just loaded up our van walk lists with people in those neighborhoods. Even if we knew the information wasn't going to be completely correct, the voter registration was going to be out of date, what have you, we knocked on so many doors. People were like, oh yeah, I just registered in the last year or 2. And oh yeah, I've heard about this guy. Or yeah, my neighbor had a sign for him. And we never would have knocked those doors if we hadn't have sort of reached down deeper into our voter universe to pick up more people. But because we wanted to just get kind of the bang for our buck without doing a mailer, we just went almost every house on a block at some points in areas where we knew we were going to do well and just wanted to drive up the score, so to speak.
Yeah, if you, I don't know as much about denser cities, but in a city like Austin, right, where it's predominated by single family homes, the people who are in apartments and moving in and out of them frequently are precarious, which means they're going to be politically similar to. So if you just found an apartment complex that went, for Bernie last time, none of those people are going to be living there anymore, but all the people that moved in are going to be demographically similar to the people who moved out.
All right, we are just about at time, folks. So thank you all for joining us tonight. Good luck with everyone's GOTVs. You can donate to our socialist slate if you so desire, or get your friends to donate, steal their credit cards. It's okay, it's social pressure. It's a good cause. Great stuff to plug here. So I'll stop sharing the screen there. If folks need any resources afterwards, anything that we can be helpful with, hit us up. NEC@dsacommittees.org. Great. Any final words, Stu, Seneca?
No, thanks all for coming out. Yeah, on behalf of the NEC, we hope you all do well. We hope this was informative. And like Jeremy said earlier, if you signed up via the form for this presentation, we should have your email addresses, and we can send out the presentation along with the recording. Otherwise, I dropped the NEC email address in there if you did not sign up via the form. Just email that email address and we'll send you a copy of all of this material. Seneca, are you all good? I think Seneca already dropped off. Seneca was looking to get out of here.
He might have.
All right, cool. If there's no last words, I think we're good. Thank you very much, Jeremy, for presenting. Let's give a hand for our presenter. Thank you very much, Seneca. Not here anymore, but thank you, Seneca. And thanks all. I'll see you around. Have a great night.
Bye, everyone.